Welcome to our second spring workshop titled Teaching Your Child Consent. I'm Dr. Susan Madsen, founding director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, and also I'm the Karen Hayde Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University, and I'm the host of the workshop today. This event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. We serve Utah and its residents first by producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research, and second, creating and gathering valuable resources. And then finally, we convene trainings and events like this that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Utah Education Network, UEN, the John M. Huntsman School of Business, USU Extension, and Sabrina for making this event possible. So I'd like to take just a minute and introduce you to Annie and Sabrina today, and really am grateful that they're joining us today from Sabrina. Annie Hartvigsen is a global outreach or strategist for Sabrina. She has worked in nonprofits and specifically outreach and education for the last 10 years. And she joined Sabrina, the Sabrina team in 2018. I've known Annie for a while. Annie has always felt a drive to make public programs more accessible to community members, whether that means expanding programming or helping the public connect with existing organizations and services. And in her current role, she gets to collaborate with partners all over the world doing just that. And partners like us. Thank you, Annie, for joining and partnering with the Utah Women in Leadership Project. So Sabrina, excited to have Sabrina Trimble here with us today as well. And she is a global outreach strategist as well for Sabrina. And Sabrina is a nonprofit organization that exists to liberate individuals and society from child sexual abuse and its lasting impacts. Sabrina's role includes reaching out to parents, caregivers, and individuals in the community to educate and empower them with tools to feel confident in talking to their children about healthy sexuality. And she is passionate about protecting children and supporting parents and caregivers. Excited to have them both here today. And there will be some time at the end of the workshop for questions from listeners. So I will be watching those. Submit your questions anytime in the chat or the Q&A. We use both of those. So I am just, again, so pleased to have you both here. I'll turn my camera on and turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Dr. Madsen. We appreciate it. And thank you all for joining. We're so excited to be here and represent Sabrina and share with you one of our community education classes. So to get started, I'm just going to give a little overview in addition to what Dr. Madsen has shared about Sabrina. So Sabrina, our whole mission is to liberate individuals and society from child sexual abuse and its lasting impacts. And we do that primarily three ways. First, we provide free prevention resources to empower healing for individuals who were sexually abused as children or adolescents through retreats, support groups, and online resources. Second, we provide prevention, where we educate and engage parents and caregivers to protect children from sexual abuse through community and online resources. And third, we really strive to drive awareness to motivate individuals to take action against child sexual abuse. We really believe that as we heal the one, we protect the many. And as now you know a little bit more about us, we're going to jump straight into one of our community education classes that we teach for prevention. And so I'm going to pass the time over to Annie to do that.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. It's lovely being with all of you. And Sabrina and I get to teach this class and classes like this a lot, and we feel privileged to be with all of you today to get to have this conversation. So today our topic is consent and how we can start to teach our children consent and how that impacts and reduces the risk of child sexual abuse. So first, what is consent? Consent is such an important thing to teach your children. And like I said, we'll dedicate this session to better understanding consent and identifying some principles that are key to practicing consent. However, Before we start, we want to clarify what we mean by teaching children consent. At Sabrina, our unwavering stance is that a child is never in a position to consent to abuse, which means that a child is never responsible to keep themselves safe from sexual abuse, and they shouldn't feel like it was their responsibility to stop someone from taking advantage of them. However, consent is still an important principle to teach your children. We know that kids can learn to apply principles of consent at a very young age, and we want them to feel like they have a voice and how to use that voice. As they grow and mature and find themselves in situations where they have power and influence over other individuals, peers, people like that, they will respect the other person enough that they won't act in a way that causes sexual or other harm. So to jump straight into this important topic, we'll start by watching a video of some teens explaining what they've learned about giving and receiving consent.
Consent is, so if you have consent, means that you have complete agreement and you're knowledgeable about what's going on.
When I hear the word, I think of sex. I think that's just naturally, especially being in high school and all that stuff, anything sexual in general, but it can even go outside of that.
Consent for me is like an absolute yes. It's either an absolute yes or an absolute no.
Consent to me looks like two people having a conversation and agreeing on the same thing. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with any adults in my life actually about what consent is. My entire opinion of it was completely shaped by what I've seen on the internet. No one ever sat down with me and talked to me about consent. I don't even know if my parents have ever said the word consent.
I would say that consent goes for a lot of different situations. Consent can be anything from like your teacher letting you leave class to like any intimate situations or just your parents giving you consent to go hang out with your friends. It's kind of like permission in a way.
Consent has changed for me as I've gotten older quite a bit, and it's shifted. Well, if I'm gonna let you touch me, that means I trust you. How much do I trust you enough to touch me? That's how I view it now.
I feel like we can give consent in a lot of different ways. It's not only yes or no, but sometimes it's body language, sometimes it's the words that you're using, sometimes it's just the way that you say things.
I think it's definitely important for teenagers to know about consent, but before it's a problem.
I was in a situation where I was on a date and I felt a lot of pressure to give consent to something that I didn't want to.
I'm a senior in high school. I've been in a relationship or two. I think it was something that I went out of my way and like talked about with friends too, about like what consent means before I was in a relationship, because that's really important.
I think it was just like getting an okay from somebody to do something. I don't know, I think of consent, I mostly think of like girls and like parties, because like you mostly see it related to girls, but it like goes both ways.
You need to consistently be checking for consent and giving consent. And it's not just you said yes one time to one person, therefore with that person forever, that means yes.
I feel privileged to get to learn from those teens and how they're starting to navigate and think about, how do I explain consent? How does consent apply to me in my situation? So we would love to know. Use the chat. We're going to use this section. This discussion today is in 3 sections. This first part is all going to be about how do we define consent? How do we start to learn how to explain consent? What does that look like? So I would love for you to drop in the chat how you would start to explain consent. And maybe you're a parent of a really young kid, and so that explanation of consent is going to look different than maybe some of the ways we describe it to our teens. Maybe you're not a parent, and how would you describe consent to a niece, a nephew, someone you mentor? So start thinking about that and drop it in the chat. While you do that, I'll share a definition of consent that we use at Sabrina. So at Sabrina, sometimes the definition we use is consent is an agreement between individuals that's enthusiastic, reciprocal, and continuous. But again, what does that mean? So while you're thinking through your definition of consent, I'd love, Sabrina, when you think about explaining things like enthusiastic, reciprocal, or continuous, what do you think some of the connotations or images that come up when you hear those words?
Thanks for asking, Annie. I guess to start with the enthusiastic aspect, I think when I think of enthusiastic, it means both parties genuinely want to participate, right? I think back to when I was a kid and I have one little brother. And when he would want to play with me because he was my little brother, I wouldn't always want to play with him. And he'd be like, come on, let's go play. And I'm like, okay, fine. And
Yeah.
that isn't what we want to be able to when we're participating in physical relationships or participating in giving consent in any way. We want to make sure both parties are enthusiastic and genuinely want to participate. When I think of reciprocal, it's similar, right? Is that it's going both ways, that both people genuinely want to engage in whatever they're choosing to. And for last, for continuous, I think that one of the most important aspects of consent is that just because we say yes once doesn't mean we say yes forever. And so like if I have one of my roommates ask me to borrow my t-shirt, I'm more than happy to be like, yeah, totally, borrow my t-shirt. But that doesn't mean that I want them to borrow every single t-shirt every single day,
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so those are some examples I think of when it comes to consent being enthusiastic, reciprocal, and continuous.
I really love what you highlighted. And in that last one, I feel like you're really highlighting what one of the individuals in the clip was mentioning about how it needs to be continuous check-in. It needs to be continuous communication. A yes once doesn't mean a yes always. And such a good reminder. Dr. Madsen, I'd love to know if we have some answers in the chat about people joining us today. What are their thoughts?
Yeah, one person said, I started with my kids saying they don't have to give someone a hug or a kiss, or they don't have to give someone a hug or a kiss if they don't want to. When we talk about how they get to make decisions, with their bodies, that's just the conversation this person was saying. And then another one, consent is giving your approval for things happening to you. You have the right to have your environment be comfortable, so you can let others know if you are not comfortable. I like that one. And
I love that.
Here's a couple. Someone just says giving permission. Another one is sharing a video, a YouTube video about tea and consent. I can put that in the chat. It says it is a little bit humorous, but it makes it clear what is and what is not consent. So I could put that in. A few more. Consent is making an informal decision without feeling pressured.
Well, that's so key.
Yeah.
Love that.
One or two more? Few more?
Yeah, let's hear a couple more.
Okay. My kids have talked about their personal rules, such as no hitting or hugs. Okay, if I say yes at the time. I think they learned this in school or daycare. They were very young when they came home and talked about this. Now they're teenagers, but yeah, no hitting or hugs or whatever. But that's great. Another short one is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So the acronym for that is FRIES. Have you heard that one? I haven't. So let me say that again. So freely give. So FRIES. I've heard that. Freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And that's an easy way to remember it. Thank you so much for sharing those, Dr. Madsen, and thank you to everyone who participated in the chat. I love that first one, how it mentioned kids being able to say yes or no to hugs or high fives. I appreciate how you're highlighting how this can be a conversation that starts at such a young age. And I think ideally families are where people can practice consent in really safe, low stakes ways, right? And that I think highlights that. Some of the other things that you've mentioned in the chat, go straight into our next conversation. And we've talked about a definition of consent, but then we kind of want to broaden that with some principles of consent. And a lot of you have highlighted things that we'll read through here in just a minute. So first, I want to highlight mutual respect. And Sabrina, do you mind reading that one?
Yeah, for sure. Mutual respect is key in consent. Others should respect your choices, and you need to respect the choices of others.
Thank you. I feel like that goes right into boundaries. Boundaries are limits that you define based on behavior that is acceptable to you. You have the right to choose what feels comfortable to you and to express your preferences and desires. Others also have the right to define what feels comfortable to them. I feel like this goes right in line with our comment about environment, how you who explained in the chat that we have control over our environments, and that helps people know what we are comfortable with. I think that really goes in line with what this conversation about boundaries is highlighting. Sabrina, do you mind reading communication?
For sure. Communication can be done verbally or non-verbally, and body language can be a strong indicator of someone's comfort in a given situation. Continuous communication is so important in order to make sure everyone is still comfortable with what is happening.
So key. Just keep checking in and using our words. And I love how this highlights verbal and nonverbal language. We'll talk about that a little bit more in our next section. But how do we help kids read nonverbal cues? Body language, enthusiasm can be so apparent in how we talk and the tone of our voice, but enthusiasm is also something that is so communicated by our body language. So I like that it highlights that. Ability, this is a key one that I feel like we don't always talk about. If someone is unable to agree to something, they don't have the ability to consent. For example, a child may not be able to comprehend what they are agreeing to, which indicates a lack of ability to consent. We kind of talked about that in my opening comments. If someone is asleep or unconscious or in an altered state, they are also unable to consent. Additionally, power differences may influence a person to feel pressured to make a choice. So I really like to highlight the latter half of this. I feel like we are getting better about talking about ability. As Susan mentioned, I've been working at Sabrina for the last 5 years, and I feel like our conversation surrounding this has even just changed so much in the last 5 years of working in this with this nonprofit. And I feel like we are getting better about talking about, if someone is on a substance or asleep or things like this. I sometimes think we miss the conversation about power differences. And so I just think about your children or the kids that you care about. Are they really popular? Do they kind of call the shots in their friend group? Have you had a conversation with them that asks, like, do you ever feel like you're in a position to pressure someone because they want to feel included or invited the next time? Do you feel like if they say no, they'll still get invited? Do they feel that? Vice versa, think about your kids. Maybe the kids that you care about are really shy and are more susceptible to people pleasing because they feel lonely or isolated. Is there a way to have this conversation of, do you feel added pressure to say yes to friends at school because you're worried you won't be invited the next time? Are you worried you won't be popular or things like that? I think this is an added element of consent and power dynamics that we don't always drill down on, that I think can be really, really important to just think about and prime that conversation. And then the last one I feel like we've highlighted and is so important is ongoing. Sabrina, do you mind reading that?
Just because you receive consent once doesn't mean you've received a permanent yes. Anyone involved may change their mind at any time and has the right to express that change.
I love that. And you highlighted that in your borrowing my t-shirt. Yeah, that's fine today, but tomorrow I'm wearing that. So this does not mean forever. I love it. At the end of every one of our sections, we love to encourage and invite people to take action on some of the things that they've learned. And we would love if you'd shared a thought or an insight that you've had in this first section with someone this week, maybe in a conversation or a text. And Sabrina and I always say, use us as, as examples, or not maybe as examples, but you can blame us. If you're nervous about bringing this conversation up out of the blue, you can just say, oh, well, I just heard about this. So you can always use us if we're an entry point into a conversation. This concludes our first section. We really feel like these conversations are better once we have kind of working definition of consent and what we mean by consent, how to start to describe that. And I'll hand it off to, please, Dr. Madsen.
I was just really intrigued with some of these comments and some of the things that you're saying. One thing I think is just so important, that we can start consent conversations that don't have to do with
Right.
sexuality. I mean, toys, consent for toys and clothes and body space. And so I'm assuming, I don't know the research on this, but I'm assuming if kids get used to this consent with other things, that it will be something they can pick on and have, pick up as it moves to abuse and those kinds of things. Is that correct? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think what you've highlighted is, as kids see adults respecting boundaries and respecting their consent, then if they're in a situation with an adult that's saying, maybe you have to do whatever I ask, I'm an adult, or I said you had to, and they think, no, I practiced and that's not how other people say this goes. So this is a red flag for me. This doesn't feel right. Maybe if we're in a situation where it's always, you just do whatever you're told, no matter what, then if they're in a situation where someone might take advantage of that, it cannot feel off or wrong.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sabrina, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Annie. Now that we've talked a little bit more about what consent is, we're going to dive into why teaching consent is so important. So our last discussion really focused on understanding consent and principles of consent. And now we're really going to just talk through why it's important and how we can model and teach it. So before we jump in, I just want us to consider the following statistics. First, that children know the perpetrator in around 80% of the reported cases of sexual abuse. Second, that while there is risk for children of all ages, children are most vulnerable to abuse between the ages of 7 and 13. And lastly, youth are responsible for about half of all sexual offenses against other children. So these statistics point to the importance of preventing your child from being a survivor, but also serve as a reminder of how teaching consent can prevent your child from abusing others. Keep this information in mind as we watch the next video, because it really is a powerful example of consent in action.
On a Friday game day, we try to get there as early as we can so we can get near the front of the student section. The cheerleaders get us really hyped up, so it's really fun. It's always so fun. I was near the end of the bleachers, and one of my friends came up to me, and we've been friends since I've moved into this school. He said he was hungry and wanted to go get food. I was like, yeah, right, I'm not missing this game. I want to be back to see the football players after the game. We'll just go get food and we'll come right back. Like, whatever you want, I'm buying. I'm like, well, I'm broke, so you can take me to go get food. That sounds great. I told one of my friends that I was leaving, and I told him who I was leaving with. We got to the car, and we were driving around, and he's like, all right, where do you want to go? We pulled in to a fast food place just through the drive-thru. So he gets the food out of the window and says, okay, you don't get this until you make out with me. I thought he was just kidding. I didn't really respond. Didn't want to give him any reaction to it. I was like, just give me my food. I said that, just give me my food. He started driving through some back roads, and I told him I wanted to go back to the high school. He started talking more about how we should date, we should make out in high school because we've been meant to do it, so why not do it tonight while we're alone? I kept saying I wanted to go back to the high school. About a month and a half before this happened, I went to a class called The Meaning of Consent with my dad.
Let me share a specific example from my daughter.
It talked about what you need to say to get your point across, and I think it was just in my subconscious that that's what I needed to do.
The boy was showing her affection without her consent. This was alarming to her and alarming to me.
I finally persuaded him to head back towards the school, and we went to a four-way stop, and I assumed we were just going to the high school, but he ended up turning the other way into this neighborhood that I'm not familiar with. He went and parked behind an elementary school in the middle of this neighborhood. That's when I started to get sick, a bit scared. I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea what to say or what to do. Where is this? Where are we right now? Why aren't we back at the high school? He didn't say anything, because right when he parked the car is when he decided he was gonna do what he wanted to. I felt powerless. I needed help. I was on my seat to the point where I could be as far away from him as I could. He lunged at me, and then he grabbed me. I pushed him off and said no. He tried again. I avoided that one a little bit better, but I still didn't avoid it completely. It's weird how fast your mind works in those kinds of situations. I stated my boundaries, and I specifically said no. It's because of that class.
And she had the voice to say no. She understood consent.
I pulled out my phone and told him that my sister was texting me, but I was actually texting one of the friends I was at the football game with. My friend, instead of coming to get me, just decided he would get the number of the guy I was with, and he called him and told him, "You need to take Paige home now." That's when it kind of clicked in this guy's head. So I got out of the car, and I just went straight towards the back gate. I just felt like I needed to be in somewhere. So I just shut the gate, and I just dropped on the ground and cried. I felt guilt. I felt that I had put myself in that situation, and I felt that I didn't do everything I could to get out of it. I was also really nervous to talk to my parents about it because I knew I needed to, but I really didn't want to.
We weren't home when she came home, and she called. Emily said, "We need to go. Paige has been assaulted." And so we raced home, not knowing what we would find when we got home. Just the unknown. It was that fear of the unknown. When I saw her, I gave her a hug and just wanted to try to let her know it will be okay.
I was glad to see she was physically, say, unharmed, like she wasn't, hadn't been beat up or, any of that sort, but she was visibly shaken and literally shaking. You can be threatened, and it's about right here, and then your child can be threatened, and it's a whole new level.
She did everything right, and I could tell immediately that she felt that she had done things wrong and that she was to blame. And I wanted her to know instantly that that wasn't the case, and that she did great things, and it was going to be okay. Yeah, I'm not sure why I decided that night that I was going to go over there and talk to his parents. He's a teenager now, and he's making smaller choices, but I don't know what he's going to grow up to be. It was important for me to help him. I'm hoping that his parents will have at least been able to chat with him and have those uncomfortable chats with him about the choices he's making and how he treats others and women in particular.
It's been eye-opening because things just aren't stories you hear anymore. It's real.
My name is Paige, and this is my story. I'm using my voice to empower myself and to empower others my age.
All right. So there are so many things that we could talk about from this video. And there are so many examples from the previous slides that we've learned from that we can pull from Paige's story. But what I really want us to focus on is this question. As parents and caregivers of children, how can we teach them to acknowledge and respect all forms of communication, verbal and nonverbal? So I would love to invite everyone in the chat to write your thoughts down about this question, about how we can teach the children in our lives to acknowledge and respect all forms of communication. And while I give you guys some time to do that and formulate your thoughts and type it out, I would love to ask Annie a question or two. So first, Annie, I know there's so much that's covered in Paige's story, but what was one thing that really stood out to you?
Oh, wow. I think so. As you know, we get to watch this video as we teach. So I think something different hits me every time. As I was watching it this time, I was so struck by just kind of what Dr. Madsen was saying before we started this section and priming conversations. And I think how Paige felt more confidence because of that class that she'd been to. And I think it could be a class. I think it could be a positive conversation or a conversation with a parent or caregiver that she had felt like, oh, I know what I need to do. I need to say no. I can push the peer away. And I think justifiably, anytime someone's put in a situation like that, it's going to feel overwhelming, and reactions are very different. And if anyone is listening today that has been in a similar situation, our brains take over, and your reaction was totally valid, and your brain was taking care of you the way that it knew how. And I just think, can conversations help us prime reactions and how we can respond? And I think they can. I think they can give confidence to our kids as they're out with friends. And the other thing I want to highlight in this that struck me today is it's not bad that Paige was out with her friends or went to get food with this peer. That wasn't, I think that's such a normal adolescent thing to do. And so what are things that we can do to help our kids feel confidence when they're not with us, whether they're really little, playing in our neighborhood or going out with friends who can drive now as they're older? What are things that we can do to empower them to feel like when we're not there, they have the tools they need?
Yeah, I love that, Annie. Thank you. And I love that you really highlighted that we want kids to grow up to be independent and self-sufficient and autonomous, right? And of course, we never want them to be put in situations like this, but we want them to know these principles so that they know how to stand up for themselves and other people in a situation if that occurs as well. So thank you so much. Dr. Madsen, I would love to hear some of the comments from the chat.
I've been putting a few of them in the bigger chat as I've received them, but I think there's some great ones. Teaching our kids to listen. Actually just practice listening, really listening, active listening is what we call it. Teaching our kids to share their feelings with confidence. Someone else said, I asked them specifically, did you hear your brother say no? And emphasize that they need to respect each other's decisions. There's one on that's I'm intrigued with on playing charades and talking about how you were able to figure out what the word or phrase is without speaking. So the nonverbal, like practicing, watching people. I really like that. Expand the conversation from there. Let me see what else is. Another person said, I stop my kids if one or more is taking over a game system and the other is playing on. saying they need to respect the other person and honor their no when they say they are not done with it yet. Yeah, I like that one too. Let me see. If I see anything else. One parent said, I tell my kids that if they want me to stop tickling them, they just need to say stop and I will listen to them and stop. I want them to feel confident in giving or taking back their consent. And then there's a few questions in here. We can save those or whenever you are ready for them. Those are the ones that I'm seeing coming across. Oh, it might be. Yeah, I think I've hit most of them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Mattson. And I love all those examples, and I think it's so applicable. And one that I really want to highlight is the example of the parents saying that they are respectful when their kids say they don't want them to tickle anymore. I think one of the greatest things we could do for the children in our lives is show that we respect their consent and also help them learn how to respect our consent. I am not a parent yet myself, but my cousin has 2 little boys and one on the way. And I really admire how she teaches consent to her kids, because if she's on the phone with me and we're talking and about something really quick, you can hear them in the background sometimes be like, mom. And she's like,
totally.
She's like, yes, I love you. And I will be there in one moment. I am talking to Sabrina right now and we're coordinating some things. Give me 5 minutes, and she'll set a little timer. And she's like, and then I would love to come and play with you, and also helping kids know that we're respecting their consent when they say no, but also when we're like, hey, we need a moment, teaching them how to be respectful of other people's consent. And so I feel like this is such
back to listening, right? The listening that was highlighted.
Exactly. And so thank you everyone for your comments that you have been able to share. And I hope as we're having this discussion, we can see, as we know what consent is and why it's so important, it really leads into how we can teach consent. But before we jump into that section with Annie, I just want to share a little call to action. So Paige's video is really powerful and it can teach so many things. And so I want to invite people that are on today to scan this QR code, and it'll take you directly to Paige's story and the video. And we want to invite you to share that, whether that's on a social media platform you use, whether that's to text it to a friend or a family member, but just to initiate a conversation around consent and why it's important. And so with that being said, I'm going to give the time over to Annie to tell us a little bit more about how do we practice teaching consent.
Thanks, Sabrina. We've discussed the definition and principles of consent, as well as why teaching it can help prevent sexual abuse from happening to your children. Next, let's explore some ways to approach teaching children of all ages. And again, we're going to use a video to kick off our conversation. So let's listen to some parents and kids talk about how they navigate this.
Let's talk about consent. Okay.
And it's okay if you kind of look at me and then look back at the camera.
Okay. It's Matt. I'm a one-take wonder. So as a dad, I try to take two.
So my husband and I have a 14-year-old daughter and we have 10-year-old twin boys. And we have tried to have conversations with them about consent.
Do you know what the word consent means?
Kind of.
Our older kids, we've seen the benefits of them learning about consent, but our younger kids,
They're crazy.
and they're still trying to figure it out.
I had hit a point in my life where I realized I needed to teach them a little more about consent and safe touch and uncomfortable touch and no means no and stop means stop and everything like that.
So our youngest is a little crazy. She likes to climb.
And she's a spitfire.
And she's a spitfire. And she came out, climbed up on the stool, climbed up on the counter in the middle of the island and stood up. And I asked her to get down because she was, obviously I was worried about her getting hurt. And she responded to me, well, I don't have to because it's my body and I can do what I want to with my body.
Yeah.
So that one backfired.
That one backfired.
There was a time not too long ago where I told you I wanted to do your hair for pictures. And how did it make you feel when I just told you I was going to do it and you didn't get a choice?
Dang it.
Any of you ever taken food off of
your kids' plates without asking, because I do that and they don't really like that. And I started to realize I'm taking something off their plate without their consent. I'm not asking them if I can have a bite.
We were in the middle of the grocery store and our youngest tried to give our oldest a hug. And our oldest yelled at the top of his lungs, "Uncomfortable touch!"
So you decided to post my AP test scores, and I really was uncomfortable with
Okay,
that.
no wait, I didn't actually post the actual score. To my defense, I didn't really do that. I said you passed.
Okay.
Have some younger kids, and I love to run, chase them around, wrestle them to the ground, tickle them. And a lot of times in those scenarios, your kids will put up with it for a little while, but then my kids at least will start yelling, "Stop, stop, stop, I don't want to do it anymore." Those are probably some good small moments where I can demonstrate that as they express themselves and have a voice, I can honor those moments and I can stop.
Made me uncomfortable, first of all.
Why?
Because I get random people I don't even know who are just like, "Oh, way to go on your test, I'm so proud of you." Who are you?
So you feel like parents should always ask before they post?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's fair.
I think that helps communicate to them that they have a voice, and that carries on into other areas of their lives and helps them as they start to deal with bigger issues and bigger relationship situations.
Teaching consent's super important, super awesome, and pays off in the long run, but when they're little, it's probably gonna backfire sometimes.
And it will be okay still.
And it will be okay.
She likes it a lot better when I ask her if I can have a bite.
Yeah, but food is still stolen off of my plate. But it's just with consent instead.
All right. That eye roll of that teenager is everything. Every time I watch that, it cracks me up. About the ACT scores or SAT scores. So hopefully before our presentation, or we can send it over now, we have a teaching consent worksheet that we have created just to help you start thinking through some of these things. One thing that we highlighted in our last conversation is kind of like, have these conversations before, arm kids with the tools so that then they feel even more prepared. And this can feel like an overwhelming topic. So this worksheet is really meant to help you just kind of think through some of these things. And in an effort to not make it feel overwhelming, in the worksheet, you will see, you'll just pick one of the principles of consent. So thinking back, is it ability, ongoing, communication, boundaries? Pick one that you would love to focus on with a kid in mind. And then you're going to start to fill out, what are ways that I can teach them this principle? How will I know if they understand that principle? And so we're not going to take the time to fill it out today, but hopefully that is a resource that can be helpful, just even if you don't fill it out, to just think through some of those questions. And before, we always would love to hear from you. So I would love to know, how do you create a sense of safety that encourages your children to talk to you about these issues? So one thing I love about teaching these classes is we learn so much from the people participating in our discussion. So I would love to know from you, how do you create a sense of safety that encourages your children to talk to you about these issues? So I'll come back to this question. I'd love to know your thoughts. Just before we kick it over to you, I feel like we've highlighted a lot of different types of ordinary life situations where we can have these conversations. But I'd love to know, either putting you on the spot, Dr. Madsen, or Sabrina, what are times that you have used ordinary life situations to have some of these conversations?
I'll throw it to Sabrina. So I've got to think about this.
Yeah, I know. Because you think, I love how we highlighted, t-shirts. I love the person who talked about charades.
Yeah.
That was really great idea of let's talk about nonverbal cues and use a game to really practice some of those skills. I thought
And
that was
I've taught listening for years, listening skills and different things. And there are wonderful little books that you can buy with nonverbal activities or different listening that are really enjoyable. I mean, people have fun, but those skills, you have to reflect at the end, just even briefly with kids, like, or adults, to link the learning, not just do it, but close the loop in terms of link the learning, like this helps us do this or whatever. So they connect, but there are lots of books with activities.
I love that idea. And even just the individual who said they use charades, just at the end of a game of charades saying, how could you tell what people were communicating with their bodies? What are other places when you're playing games that you might have seen that? Where did you see that on the way to school today or something like you said, linking that learning? Sabrina, what are your thoughts?
I just think in addition, with my cousin's boys, it's been really interesting. We'll like watch different cartoons or play different games or read different books. And sometimes as we're like watching a show, for example, you can see how the characters are sad or mad or angry or frustrated because of something that happened. And I will look. So when this was occurring, the last time that specific I'm thinking of my mind was when this little boy was about 3.5, 4 years old. And I was like, what do you think they're feeling? And he's like, oh, they look sad. I was like, why do you think they're sad? And he's like, oh, because Bluey stole the toy, And I was like, oh, what, do you think that's a very nice thing to do? He's like, no, not at all. And just like, however that went down, obviously that wasn't verbatim, but that was in essence what that conversation looked like between the two of us, and just helping him see like through another example that wasn't just his own life of like what some of these things look like through verbal and nonverbal cues. So
I love
how you highlighted. Oh, go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say, one of the comments in the chat was they have a family mantra, our family tells the truth. And so that's interesting because I've thought about this for years, and sometimes we think we tell our kids the truth, but sometimes like they really play terribly with the sport or something. We're like, you were so great, or gave a talk and it went, and so, I thought a lot about that, and I've talked to some teenagers and they're like, no, my mom will just tell me all the time I look great wearing this outfit, and I know it's not great. And so I wrestle with that a little bit, if your kid's always gonna even, with know that they're getting the truth. So that's just something to wrestle with a little bit.
Yeah, that definitely something to think about. I would love to know, do we have any responses in the chat to this question about how do you create a sense of safety?
Yeah. Here's one-on-one time. Spending one-on-one time with my kiddos means that we get to do stuff we like together, and we get to have uninterrupted conversations. My kids usually guide the conversations. It's great for building a relationship of trust. I have to say, when I grew up, I have 6 brothers, so there were a lot of us. But through most of my life, my dad would say, you have a half hour this week and you can choose to do anything. And so even when I was in college, I still did this, and I played ping pong for years and foosball, but ping pong, I'm a super good ping pong player because I had that space with my dad every week and I got to choose. So I love that. Here's another one. We also want to get the link. Oh, yeah, someone else. We want to make sure we get the link to the recording.
It's coming your way later.
Okay. Making sure you're in a safe space and checking our own biases and attitudes. I think that's interesting because,
that's powerful.
Yeah. And I've had my own kids, like I teach listening, but I'm not the best all the time. But I had my kids, you're not listening, so it's like, recently, I haven't been good about this through my life. I'm like, you're right. You kind of have to admit when you're not perfect. Here's another one. I like to be in a one-on-one place like driving. That's what I'd be doing chores or right before bed where they are comfortable. And I try to ask questions that are open-ended. Another one, be available. Work to keep open communication always, not just with this specific issue.
Yes, yes, I love that. And I love that someone has said that, because these are tools that reduce the risk of abuse. These are tools that build relationships, which reduces the risk of abuse, So I love that someone has highlighted that these tools can be used in so many conversations, not just conversations about boundaries or, power dynamics or just anything in those conversations, things surface that are important for reducing the risk of sexual abuse and reducing the risk of so many other things as well.
Yeah, there's just a couple more. Ask my kids about their opinions without judgment and not providing my opinion about everything. So, what's your opinion regarding this scene in the movie? How about these song lyrics? How do you feel? And then another person says, we also normalize apologizing when we're wrong, including myself, if I'm wrong, and respond in a way that I shall also apologize to my children. Those are great.
Those are great. I just want to highlight a couple of nuggets in there that I just feel like are gold. The person who mentioned, oh, I'll ask my kids about a movie or a song. Sometimes I feel like as kids get older, you may think, I don't know. I feel like as they get older, these conversations sometimes get harder and more awkward. Like, oh, I don't want to talk to you about that, or eye roll, right? And I think just asking questions about things that are coming up is a more easier, more natural way to do that, right? I think anytime you sit a kid down and have a conversation, it's like, oh, there's just like pending dread of like, where's this going? But if you're in the car and a song comes up and it highlights maybe some not so consenting values, you could just ask a question about that. Or, a movie, a situation in a romantic comedy or something you're watching as a family and thinking, oh, did that feel like that was 100% consent? What do you think? And having some of those just things you're already doing, wrap those conversations in, it can be less intimidating than like sitting down and having a conversation. I think another thing, I loved the person who said, let's check our own biases. One thing that we teach at Sabrina and bring up often is, as you're having conversations and kids tell you things, try to respond and not react. Because kids very infrequently read reaction as open or comfortable. And even if your reaction is not at your kid, it's just to the situation, they tell you something that kind of is alarming or puts you on edge, and it's not their fault, but you want to protect your kids. And so this is kind of the attitude that comes up. And I think it's easy for kids to read that as they did something wrong, or they start to take on shame, or, oh, I shouldn't have said anything because now this has upset you. I won't say that next time. And responding, not reacting, can be so hard. But just in a situation, if something is a red flag, really trying to catch yourself and just think, oh, tell me a little bit more about that. Why did that make you uncomfortable? I'd love to know. Oh, that's really good. And then later being like, what the heck? What do I do? We have the reactions eventually, but I loved how someone highlighted checking themselves, checking your own biases. So just such good content in there. Before we move to our last take action, Sabrina, anything that caught your attention in those comments?
It's a great question, Annie. I think the big one that really stood out to me is when the parents said that they wanted to acknowledge when they also made a mistake and like own the fact and apologize. I feel like oftentimes there can be a lot of pressure for kids to be like the best and be perfect and be like high achieving and all these things, and I think sometimes a fear of failure is very real. And I think coming and having some of these conversations that may be difficult, they may not want to have them, right? Even though Paige did nothing wrong in her story, she's like, oh, it's still hard. I don't want to go, I don't know how to talk to my parents about this, but as we help them know that no matter what the situation is, no matter if we handle it super well or if we don't handle it super well, when we make mistakes, it's okay to own that. And I will show that to you as a parent, that I will own my mistakes and I will own what I'm doing. And I want to encourage you to do the same, to be able to create that open line of communication for kids of all ages, right? Whether we're 5 or whether we're 25 or 55, right? Like we want to be able to turn to people and know that they will accept us for how we are and that we can learn and grow from each experience for good.
I wanted to jump in just real quick. I really think if you haven't, any of you listening, have not read the full book on mindset, what we're talking about is really, Sabrina, that being open, if we're in the growth mindset, to learning and growing and creating a home. I think this consent conversation goes hand in hand with creating a space for the growth mindset kind of work that we can do individually and in the home.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Madsen. I totally agree. I love that book. But anyway, that's my thought, Annie. Thank you.
I love both of those comments. And you're making me think, Sabrina, one thing I feel like to highlight is that stat where half of abuse cases are at the hands of someone under the age of 18. And as we create a culture in our homes where we can be wrong and make mistakes and have people help us from a very young age, then as things come up, kids will ask for help in how they're navigating things. And, if you create a culture in your home where you have one of your kids come home and say, I don't think I behaved okay at that party. I mean, what teen says that? I don't think what I did at a party was cool, and I feel kind of bad about it. If you have a culture in your home where you're going to say, okay, let's talk about that. What happened? What could you do to make it better? What can we do moving forward? And not a reactive situation where there's not growth and you can't be wrong and there's immediate punishment without listening. I think then kids who are navigating or maybe have exercised power over someone in a way that wasn't super kind and in low stakes and high stakes situations, then that's not getting caught or helped or supported. So I like how you're highlighting that, just creating that environment of being able to say sorry and being wrong and getting help is really key to being on both sides of this. I love that. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts in the chat. This has been a great conversation. We're going to come to some questions in a minute, but before we do, the last thing we just hope that you'll do is to take that worksheet that we will send in a follow-up afterwards and try and think of some engaging learning opportunities with your children in the home. And hopefully you've learned something from each other today. We're all in this together. And so I'm always stealing ideas from other people in classes, and hopefully something struck a chord with you today. And we'd love for you to think of a time and a conversation to have with your kid where it makes sense. All right, Dr. Madsen, do we have questions?
You two are so awesome. Been good to pop in and out and listen to you. Yeah, there's a number of questions. One of them relates to Paige's dad. So in that story, Paige's dad went to the other parents. That can make people like, what if they don't believe you? And what if their child told them a different story? And is that, do you get any of those questions in other sessions? And what is your response?
And I think it's interesting someone highlighted that is noticed in a lot of our classes. We'll have parents that say, why didn't you just go straight to the police? Why I would never go confront. That feels really intimidating. So we get this entire range. And I think that's a really valid concern of a parent being defensive. Oh, my kid would never do that. And how do you start to navigate some of those conversations? And, or will you have a parent that then you're worried about how they might react to the kid in like oh, I'll take care of it. And then you're like, okay, what did I just do? I think bringing the locus of control back to your home is what is, I think, the most helpful to focus on, and thinking, regardless of who around you believes you, it is so important to believe your child and to support your child, and to provide that. There's a lot of research when kids are not believed in their stories, how that causes sometimes more damage than the abusive act. And so I think that's a big conversation of saying what to do next with other people. But I do think something to take away there is start by believing when your kids come to you with things, and that's just a good rule.
And I have to say, and I've published some pieces on this, that's a big problem, especially in the research with older women. I mean, with young women in college and so forth, that people just go straight to, not all of us, but many people go straight to unbelieving. I wrote a piece called Believe Her. And the research says there's so few, very small, like 2% of people that, and the kids is, that would really make up something of a sexual nature, and it's just believe is the best place to start. So there was an important comment, I think. Someone, I'll just read it. Is consent being taught in Utah schools? I grew up in another state and learned consent through, it was called the Good Touch, Bad Touch program. And I know it's received some criticism, but I remember thinking it was important to learn that. And so, it is something that's been talked about a lot in Utah and pushed down, but any comments?
Yeah, there are some bills that help us teach this in the schools. Prevent Child Abuse Utah is another amazing resource on the prevention arm. Sabrina works specifically with child sex abuse prevention, but PCAU works with abuse across the board. And I know that they are able to teach some classes in the schools. And that's, another resource to look into and to support. And so I would say Utah, people do get nervous about teaching, just sex education, consent, things like this. And it's something Dr. Madsen works a lot about. A lot of people work around this. But where we are able to, there are organizations doing really good things.
Thank you. There's another, all these comments are important. There was another one about, and my assumption with the page video is that they didn't show everything that happened.
Correct.
That there were things happening, they just showed a bit of it. So someone said, I think assault was too strong of a word for what happened to Paige. It wasn't an attempt assault, but my understanding was probably they didn't show the whole thing. But any comments about that?
Out of respect for Paige, we didn't show everything that happened. And also wanting this to be a video that could be accessible and could start conversation, but not be really triggering. It's already kind of a triggering video.
Yes,
and so just wanting to balance that. Also to that comment, I would say, and one thing that we try to talk about with survivors of abuse of any kind is, our bodies record trauma in such different ways. And it can be trauma that's happened one time or trauma that has occurred over many years. And it's just so individual how our body records things. And so I think also just being really generous of, sometimes when we hear people disclose to us and say things like, oh, well, that wasn't that bad. And I'm not saying this is what this person was saying in this comment, but it just made me think. I think we as a community can do better at how has this impacted your life, not what happened to you.
Yeah, because what happens often is about us. It's our curiosity. It's about, we need to think about what's for them, it seems like. Thank you.
And how can we support and help now?
Yes. Yeah. And then someone asked, are there some good consent books out there? I know on the Sapria website, there's other tools and different things as well, but any other tools or books or, anything like that?
I feel like I've been talking so much, Sabrina.
I would say specific books, and you'd have to give me more specifics on the actual books that you might suggest. But I would say anything that you go through as a parent beforehand, even as kids are young, right? Where it's teaching them to like share toys. I think that's important all the way up until they're older and in teenage years, right? To have books that are more about consent regarding physical affection and things like that. But off the top of my head, I can't think of a book title. Annie, do you have any that are coming to mind?
We do have on Sapria, we have a list of recommended reading, and it's everything from, because we help adult survivors of child sexual abuse and also parents prevent. So it's going to run that range, but look at our recommended reading list. And then also there are some in the chat, I think, that I'm seeing people see is for Consent as a board book. Someone brought up, I love Sabrina's idea of there are quite a few resources out there, and then I would just kind of read through them and read reviews and see what fits your family values and what you're hoping to convey.
And we can link to any resource, in our report. And this one was to Sabrina. Are there extra measures of consent that are taken with minors who have been physically, emotionally, sexually abused? And I know there's this person do you work with state agencies for kids in foster care, and there's a number of different things, but any responses to that?
It's a great question. My initial thought, not knowing the full context of the question with the extra measures of consent that are taken with minors who have experienced these things. I know that I did have an opportunity to work with the Children's Justice Center while I was going to school at Utah State University. And it was incredible to see all of the extra measures that were shown of helping the kids while they were there. Often it occurs right after their abuses happen, is when they come to the Justice Center, and we're able to have a detective talk to them and they're able to share their story. And if there were multiple children involved, we also were able to be with them and just like talk with them and like play with them with toys and things like that. And I would say the extra measures of consent were just being respectful of while they were not talking to the detective, to be like, how are you feeling? Would you like to play with this toy or this toy? Because the kids range in ages from 1 to 18, and so you're working with a very different demographic just every day based upon who's coming in. But specifically when it comes to state agencies for foster care and that and such, we are currently working with a partnership with a foster care system in Utah and teaching some of these classes to incoming parents that are wanting to be foster parents, to be able to help them, one, understand some of the triggers that some of the kids that will be under their care may be experiencing because of their past experiences, and how to handle that. And like what Annie had taught earlier, right? How to respond and not to react, to be able to help with extra measures there. And then also helping them always, as foster parents, be encouraged to give the children choices, right? Because oftentimes their consent has been violated in a variety of ways, like Sharon asked, whether that's physical, emotional, or sexual. And so as a foster parent, being like, okay, let's say the kid is 17, right? And you're like, all right, they need to go to bed and they don't want to go to bed. So like, do you want extra 5 minutes of video game time, or do you want to have 10 to 15 minutes to like sit down and have some one-on-one time and like have some hot chocolate together? Two options that you're very happy with, but giving them the choice still to choose what makes them happy and what they're most comfortable with. And that works with any age range. And so that's kind of the first thoughts that came to my mind as Sharon asked that question. But Annie or Dr. Mattson, do you have any additional thoughts to that?
Not that specifically, but I do think I need to close in just a second. So I'll just make a statement, then I'll need to close. But one person said something about what if your child is a perpetrator. And one of the things that came to mind is what your, Chris Yaden, who has run Supriya for lots of years, told me that these conversations about consent in different ways through the years actually helps reduce. They not only help kids that may have inappropriate touching or things starting down that line to be able to talk or after something has happened, but also it could prevent your own kids or kids around. And I think that's really an important point to make. So thank you. Thank you so much to both of you for coming today and teaching this. Thank you to our sponsors, the Utah Education Network, the John M. Huntsman School of Business, USU Extension, and then of course, Supriya, who is such a strong partner of ours, and we love the work that you're doing. So thanks again for all of you for joining, and to our two presenters today. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you
for coming, you guys.